Hello, everyone, and welcome to Eat to Treat. I'm Amaris Williams. I'm a PhD in nutrition, and I'm an avid foodie and cook. I do live cook along cooking demonstrations of diabetes friendly and hypertension friendly recipes. The diabetes friendly recipes are every first Saturday, and the hypertension friendly recipes are every third Saturday, both at 3 p.m. Eastern. I post the ingredients ahead of time the Wednesday before on eat-to-treat.org so that you guys can join me in the kitchen as we prepare a delicious meal. Today we're making curried salmon stew, which you guys are gonna love. So let's get started. The first step is we're gonna slice an onion, but everyone hates slicing an onion. So the first step actually is we're gonna open our bottle of wine. I've got a glass here, and I'm going to show you what one serving of wine is. One serving of wine is about 6 ounces, which a lot of restaurants, they give you way more, which is nice for the money, but it's more than a serving of wine. So this is about a serving of wine. Cheers, everyone. Uh, you can drink the rest of the wine that you are cooking with, but probably not all in one sitting. It's probably not recommended. So, um, so let me change the camera angle. All right. So I'm gonna slice this onion. The easiest way to do that is to cut the onion in half through the root and the stem end, and that way the onion's not gonna roll around while we're slicing it. And then I'm gonna curl my fingers under and let the knife travel along my knuckles so that I'm not gonna cut off my fingertips. And I'm just gonna roughly slice the onion. It doesn't have to be anything special. And I'll do the other half. I don't want that. And at home, now that we've got our onions sliced and I've made a mess, you can take a sip of your wine and turn your pot on to medium. Add 2 tablespoons of olive oil to the pot. And we're going to throw the onions in there. Now, the purpose of the onions is not really to add a vegetable to the dish, it's to add flavor. Onions are aromatic, and adding them to the soup mostly just adds flavor. The next thing we're going to prepare is a couple of carrots. I'm using whole carrots. You can use baby carrots if you like. If you have baby carrots, you can elect to cut them in half long ways, or you can just throw them in there whole. If you cut them in half long ways, you will end up with softer carrots in the finished dish. But if you don't cut them in half, then you'll have a little bit of crunchiness still in your finished product, because we're not going to cook the soup too long, so the carrots aren't going to turn mushy or get overdone. All right, we got 1 carrot peeled. I'm going to stir my onions. and peel the other carrot. A fun fact that I learned from someone who watches those How It's Made shows is that baby carrots, they take whole carrots and then they use water to cut them. That's what I heard. I'm not sure how true that is, but sounds interesting. So I'm gonna cut the tip and the stem end of the carrot off, keeping my fingers well out of the way. Stir the onions. All right, now I'm going to show you how chefs cut carrots. They don't cut the carrot perpendicular where the knife is at a right angle to the carrot. They turn their knives to the side at a 45-degree angle, and they cut on the bias. It's called cutting on the bias. And what that does is, instead of having a circle piece of carrot, you end up with an oval. And so it looks fancier and it's nicer. And so you end up with decorative medallions of carrots. And so that's what we're going to put in our stew. You can see how thickly I was cutting them. Decent thickness, maybe about half the thickness of your finger. And that will keep the carrot from disintegrating in the stew. I don't like mushy vegetables in my stew. I still want them to have a little bit of bite to them. So I'm gonna cut them a little chunky here. Go ahead and put this in there. All right. The next step is I'm going to add this whole jar of red curry paste. So let's get this open. The downside to using prepared curry paste like this is that it has a lot of sodium in it. This whole jar has over 2,000 milligrams of sodium in it. And the amount of sodium we're aiming to get in the day is less than 1,500 milligrams. So this is over by 500 milligrams of sodium. The reason why it's okay to use is because we're not going to eat the whole thing at one time. We are going to eat just 1/6 of this, because this whole recipe makes 6 servings. So each serving is going to have around 550 milligrams of sodium in it. And actually, I can pull up the label. All right, now on the screen, you can see the nutrition facts label. On the left is what you would see, what you're eating if you ate light coconut milk in the stew. If you bought full fat coconut milk, you would look at the one on the right. As you can see, both of them have about the same amount of sodium in them, which is about 550 milligrams, which is not bad for one meal. Because if our goal is to get 1,500 or fewer milligrams of sodium, don't forget to stir your pot. If our goal is to get 1,500 or fewer milligrams of sodium, that's about 500 per meal. All right. So, I'm gonna add this whole thing, and then we're gonna stir constantly for a minute because this will burn. So let me change the angle a little bit. I'm gonna put this in. Yes, this does smell good. The only thing that would make this better is if we were putting garlic and ginger in there. I love the smell of garlic and ginger, but this recipe doesn't call for it. So we're gonna stir this so it doesn't burn. And let it cook a little bit. The next step is we're gonna pour some of our wine in there. So it's good that we've already opened it, so we don't have to stop stirring to open the wine to put it in the pot. Jenny, if you want to add garlic and ginger, go for it. I bet it would make the stew taste even better, but I tried to keep it as simple as possible for everybody at home. Especially if you have already chopped up garlic and ginger paste, it would be so easy to add it. All right, I think that's enough stirring. We're gonna add about 2/3 of a cup of white wine. You can measure it or you can just eyeball it. I'm gonna measure here and pour that in. And we're gonna let that come up to the boil and reduce down to about 1/3 cup worth of liquid. And while we're waiting on that, the next step is to add the vegetable stock and the coconut milk. So as you can see, I've got light coconut milk here. Excuse me. And I've got a low sodium vegetable broth. It doesn't have to be organic, but the low sodium part is important, especially since we have so much sodium in our curry paste. The good news is most of what we've put in the pot already doesn't have much carbohydrates in it, and that's why this is a diabetes friendly recipe. So we're going to use 2 cups of vegetable broth. And I'm measuring that out here, kind of halfway off the screen where you can't see. All right, 2 cups of vegetable broth. And the rest of this you can put in the fridge and it'll keep probably until the next recipe, which probably will call for vegetable broth. And the next live stream will be on the 3rd Saturday of the month, January 21st at 3 p.m. And now we're going to open the coconut milk. Now, even though this is light, it's still going to have a little bit of saturated fat in it. So it might have a solid kind of layer on the top of the lid. But no, it doesn't. This one's not solid. Sometimes when you open these cans of coconut milk, it'll be like a solid layer on the top right here, and that's normal. That doesn't mean that it's gone bad. No need to throw it out, especially if you're using full fat coconut milk. And so this has reduced down, so I'm gonna add my vegetable stock and then turn it up a little bit so it boils. So I'm at medium high now, and I'm gonna add the coconut milk as well. And don't forget about your wine. Have a sip of that. All right. While we're waiting on that to boil, we're going to prepare the salmon. Let me clean up my mess here first. And I need to change the angle back to the cutting board. All right. All right. The salmon. I ended up having to buy a whole side of salmon. I spent $25 on about 3 pounds of salmon at Kroger. It was $8.99 a pound. And when I did the cost breakdown of this recipe, even with buying a whole side of salmon, this recipe costs less than $10 a serving. And you'll have salmon left over that you can put in your freezer. You can put in your freezer to use for a different recipe or to make this again. Now, what I'm going to do is, since this is about 3 pounds of salmon and the recipe only calls for 1, is I'm going to cut this into about a third. And then I'm going to skin it. And I'll show you how to skin a side of salmon. The other pieces, I'm just going to put in a freezer safe bag, a freezer Ziploc bag, and put in my freezer. So this is obviously the skin of the salmon. And what you want to do is take a corner of it and peel it back so that you can grab a hold of it. And once you've got enough to grab, hold it with your non-dominant hand, then get your knife with your dominant hand and put it between the skin and the flesh. And then you put it on a flat surface like a cutting board, and you're gonna push the knife away from you and away from your non-dominant hand, and trying to keep it as flat as possible, and angle the blade of the knife into the skin. The skin of the salmon is really tough. It's really hard to cut through. If you had a razor sharp knife, I would be worried about it, but my knife is pretty sharp, and still it's not going to cut through the skin of the salmon. So I'm angling my blade into the skin of the salmon and slicing away from me. And as you can see, I ended up with a pretty clean piece of skin here and a skinless fillet of salmon. Just that easily. If there's anybody that needs to see that again, I will do it again. I'll do it on this next piece. I'm gonna cut it another pound off, about thereabouts, and show you again. So step 1, peel back a little bit of the skin, enough for you to get a good hold of, and grab it with your non-dominant hand. Get the knife with your dominant hand. You're gonna put it in between the skin and the flesh. And then with the slicing motion, with the blade angled towards the skin, push the knife away from you while holding tightly to the skin. Et voila, salmon skin and a skinless fillet of salmon. Now this will save you so much money because the skinned salmon, oh great, I'm glad it's working for everybody at home. The skinned salmon costs like $3 more a pound, and it takes, as you can see, seconds to skin a fillet of salmon, and then all of a sudden that's worth $3 more a pound. That's ridiculous. So Let me just wipe down my board, get some of the scales off. So now you guys know how to save money on your salmon purchases by getting salmon with the skin on and turning it into skinless salmon fillets at home. All right. So I'm going to take one of these 1 pound sections and I'm going to cut it into bite-sized pieces. So just any size piece that is small enough for you to put in your mouth without choking on or whatever. So it doesn't have to be fancy. They don't even really have to be the same size, but it is helpful if they are. Then they'll all cook the same size. But fillets of salmon have thick parts and thin parts, so it's going to be difficult to get them all the same size. So you can see I cut mine into chunks about 1 inch square, cubed. All right, and then this piece. All right. So our soup is boiling away nicely. Now that it's boiling, I'm going to turn it down just a little bit. And then we're going to add the salmon and the spinach. The spinach, I don't normally measure. I just do 2 handfuls of spinach. So that's about 2 cups. And as you can see, I didn't get it organic. I just got regular spinach. And this whole bag of spinach was $2.29 plus tax. And we're not going to use the whole bag, so you'll have some spinach for a salad later if you desire. Ooh. So there's 1 handful of spinach, 2 handfuls of spinach. Throw a little bit in because that was a small handful. And it's going to cook down a lot. It looks like a lot, but it's not that much. It's going to cook down. Spinach always cooks down. And we're going to add the salmon. Give that a stir. Yes, we added the coconut milk. I'm sorry. The coconut milk was added with the vegetable stock. So it should be in there boiling away with everything else. Not checking my chat like I should be. All right, so the salmon needs to cook for about 3 to 5 minutes. It's going to cook really quickly, especially since we cut it in small pieces. And then the spinach is going to cook down in the same amount of time. What I have here are my Ziploc bags that I'm going to put my salmon in. And I've got 1 for each 1 pound section. So that's what I'm going to do now. I've got 1 skinless fillet and 1 with the skin still on. Yes, I put the coconut milk in right after I said take a sip of wine, so that might have been why why it was missed. Probably we're sipping the wine. Alrighty. The last ingredient is the cherry tomatoes, and those I'll show you how to cut them in less than a minute. Cut them all in half in less than a minute. I got these fancy tomatoes. They were on sale and they were only 30 cents more than the not fancy tomatoes, so I went on ahead and got the colorful tomatoes. All right. So what you need to cut the tomatoes is 2 saucers. This one's got a little bit of soup residue on it. 2 small saucers, and they need to be less than the length of your knife in diameter. Okay? So what we'll do is I'll wipe all the salmon residue off of your knife. The tomatoes are going to be cooked, so it's not that critical, but we don't want cross-contamination of raw salmon on the tomatoes, which are almost ready to eat, or will be eaten without that much cooking. And then you take your tomatoes and you put them in a single layer on one of your saucers. And then you take your other saucer and you put it on top of the first saucer with the tomatoes on it. Then you take your knife, and while holding down on the top of the top saucer, you just slice the tomatoes in half. And if your plates start sliding and they start trying to get away from you, don't put your hand in front of your knife. Don't do that. Put your hand behind your knife and slice through like that. Okay? I don't want any fingers sliced off. That would be bad. And so now all these tomatoes have been sliced in half. All right? And I think it's been long enough. The salmon is cooked through, the spinach is wilted. So let's add the tomatoes. And that's it, really. The soup is done. I don't like to cook the tomatoes too much because we cut them in half, they'll start to disintegrate. That's basically the whole stew. In 30 minutes, we've made an entire dinner for 6 people. So I'm gonna turn the heat off. And I've got a bowl here, and let's plate this up. Change the camera angle a little bit. Let's get some broth in there. Now, if you couldn't find light coconut milk and you used the regular coconut milk, you can refrigerate this and the fat will all rise to the top, and then you can scrape it off if you don't want to eat all that saturated fat. So let me change views here. All right, so now we've got the stew and it's ready to eat. Let's give it a taste, and then I'll let you guys get to eating with your families if that's what you're doing. All right. Mm. It's hot. But it's worth it because it's so good. The carrots are cooked perfectly. They're not they're still got a little bit of bite to them, but they're not mushy. Let's try some salmon. It's still hot, just FYI, it's still hot. Um, Salmon is cooked perfectly, not chewy. If you boil it too long, it'll get chewy. But this is not chewy. The soup has plenty of flavor from the curry, and it's just really good. It's good to you, good for you, and it was easy. So thank you so much for joining me. We made a diabetes friendly meal, and hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to be notified of the next demonstration. And I'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.